There we go. All right, fantastic. I was on a trip recently. I told some of you I was on a trip in Germany, and one of the people on the trip, very nice lady, Julie is her name. She was there with her husband and her son, her adult son, and she was streaming this last year. And I was doing something, and when they put the chyron of my name underneath me, she said, "Oh no, they've mislabeled it. That's not Dan Van Voorhis." It was me. In fact, we could make a nice little flip book of me through the years at Here We Still Stand, because I'm going to look different every single year. So, of course, I've got to follow the handsome Swede yet again. Magnus, just so all of the things that I'm not. There's a strange anxiety, I think, with this Here We Still Stand. I love this. This is a fantastic conference, but there is a weird anxiety because it's like a speaking gig meets a work picnic meets a family reunion meets like a coffee hour between church that goes on for 3 straight days, and so there's just a little bit of the awkwardness. As is my wont at this conference, because I don't know how to start a talk, I start with a special live reading of the Christian History Almanac. It's a little bit truncated because you aren't used to having to sit still while listening, but we will do our best. So, without further ado. Can you hear that? It is the 19th of October, 2024. Welcome to a special live reading of the Christian History Almanac, Here We Still Stand edition. And an edition wherein you go behind the scenes of the making of a show, when I get the yips, the scaredies, the what is this day's show about, a little bit of a behind the scenes of the Christian History Almanac, brought to you by 1517 at 1517.org. I'm Dan Van Voorhis. All right. 19th of October. There is no show today. There's a weekend edition. It's actually a replay of the Keith Green show with a new intro, but there's always something. And so I went looking for this live edition for what was happening on the 19th of October in church history. Well, there's a story I found. Charles Spurgeon, you know him, the prince of preachers and all that. He was so popular, they kept having to get bigger and bigger venues for him. And it was on this, the 19th of October, in 1856, that over 10,000 people packed Surrey Gardens Music Hall. The hall was packed, and someone shouted fire, the literal embodiment of yelling fire in a crowded theater. Pandemonium ensued. More than that tragedy, as 28 were injured and 7 were killed. From the time, the cries and shrieks at this period were truly terrific, to which was added the already pent-up excitement of those who had not been able to make their exit. They pressed on, treading furiously over the dead and the dying, tearing frantically. This is what a terrible story to tell. So we're not going to do that one. We're going to leave that alone. Because I don't want to bum you out. So then I go look. Maybe it's a saint's day. So then I look. It is a saint's day. It's Saint Aquilinus of Evro. Interesting, but doesn't really pop. Who died on this day? King John. Which King John, you say? Oh, there's only one in England. That's right. With the lion with the little snake friend. Ooda lolly. Okay, but we'll not do that one. Jerzy Popescu, fantastic story. He got his own weekend edition. Martin Luther received his Ph.D. on this day in 1512. That's a little too on the nose. Birthday of Marsilio Ficino, as well as Jonathan Swift. And being that this is a special live and behind the scenes of how I make the Almanac, I'm going to give you an inside secret that only you will now know when you listen to the show. I read from the daily lectionary on most days, but you will note there are certain times when I do not say the reading is from the daily lectionary and I just start reading. That's because the lectionary readings are weird, and I don't want to read those. So here is an actual lectionary reading for today, which I would skip over were I doing a real almanac. This from the book of Job. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears have her fawn? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? Do you? And it goes on. Who let the wild donkey go free? Will the wild ox consent to serve you? Will it stay by your manger at night? Can you hold it to the furrow with a harness? Will it wait in the valley? You can't do that. So I'd pick something else, and then I would go to the ending where I say this show is usually produced by Random Lake, Wisconsin's #1 proponent of a lunar calendar. He's serious about that. He is Christopher Bartholomew Gillespie, Esquire, and the show is written and read usually from the comfort of the plush CHA studios in Lake Forest, California, by a man jealous of your sports team's success. I'm Dan Van Voorhis, and if you know this part of the script, you can say it with me. The rumors of grace, forgiveness, and the redemption of all things are true. Everything is going to be okay until they are not. And that's what I'm here to talk about. If the church is dying, is everything going to be okay? And so I thought logically I'd start this talk by talking to you all about quantum physics. Good? Good. All right. So I want to talk about superposition and radioactive decay. Just follow me here. Radioactive decay, it's the process of an atomic nucleus losing energy by radiation. And it's something that scientists don't understand as well as they would like to. This is in part on account of radioactive decay being governed by quantum physics, the physics of very small things. And on account of this being very unpredictable, it's hard to say when an atom is, in fact, decaying. So we can't predict the decay of an individual atom, but we can predict the decay of a large number of atoms. Stay with me here. This is quantum physics. We're dealing with super small things, and so now we have a new category of existence, superposition. Superposition in quantum physics is the state of being in two states at the same time at once. And so with small radioactive particles, we can say they exist and they don't exist at the same time. This is strange. And the example you might know has to do with light, the idea that it acts like both particles and waves. So until you zoom in on a precise particle to see whether or not it has decayed, it is, in fact, in superposition. It is and it isn't at the same time. Now, there's some really interesting stuff here about natural laws and things not necessarily working according to those natural laws. That's great for apologetics, but that's for another time. There's some really interesting stuff here, because physics and quantum physics don't completely square with one another. Or so thought an Austrian theoretical physicist. His career was interrupted by World War I, but he would produce papers on physics that won him the 1933 Nobel Prize. He was on faculty at the University of Berlin. He succeeded Max Planck and became a colleague of Albert Einstein. His name was Erwin Schrödinger, and he was shaken by his own findings and the uncertainty that it entailed. And so he would spend the latter part of his career trying to dissuade people from applying these unpredictable results of quantum physics in the real world. And so he came up with a thought experiment. He says, let's make a steel box. And in it, we're going to have an atomic nucleus. And if it decays at all, it's going to trip a switch that is going to emit a poison in the box, killing the cat. Now, the problem is, with just one nucleus, we don't know if it's decayed or not. It is unpredictable. But what if you put something larger in that box? A living thing. In Schrödinger's case, a cat. Put a cat in the box, close the lid, and if the particle decays, it kills the cat. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But the state of superposition means that without being observed individually, the thing can exist and not exist at the same time. And we accept this in quantum physics. But of course, that thought experiment would mean that the cat must be in superposition as well, alive and dead at the same time until you observe it. You see where we're going. Schrödinger meant for this thought experiment to poke holes in quantum physics, but non-quantum physicists picked up the baton and started asking the question, can something be alive and dead at the same time? And of course, this is the question for this morning. This is the great Here We Still Stand tradition, where Dan Price asks you to speak, and then he gives you a topic and a title. And so he gave me this title, When the Church is Dying, Is Everything Going to Be Okay? And I wonder if Schrödinger's cat might have something to say about a dying church that also might not be dead. Now, the stats, in many ways, the stats of the dying church are inescapable. But let me suggest that the stats that we're so used to hearing are actually unpredictable, parallel to quantum physics. If anyone here is looking for a vocation, specifically in the modern church, just collect the stats you like best and tell the story you want to tell. We've got people saying that the church is alive, that it's dead, that it's getting better, that it's getting much, much worse. The past 2 years, as you've seen the documentary project, which, by the way, I want to say how amazing both of those trailers looked for the doc project. I'm on the other side of the camera for most of those things. I'm doing the interviewing and the talking. And the theme of the film, Christ for You, part of it is something's happening in the church. And so for the past 2 years, I've been getting into these stats, trying to figure out, are they depressing? Is the church dying? And I'm a little torn. I do think that the church might be in something like a state of superposition, both living and dead, until you observe the individual one. Now, part of the uncertainty with all these statistics has to do with the way in which we quantify the religious habits and practices and impulses of Americans, and the way that we have and haven't used the census to do this. This started right away in the beginning of the Republic with the very first census ever taken. And there was not going to be a question about religion on the American census. This is what America was going to do different from Europe. You could not make someone answer, what religion are you? And so that's made getting these stats about the American church really, really difficult to find. It wasn't until 1872 that the government started counting church buildings for the first time. Get this, they give a definition of the church. It must have something of the character of an institution. It must be known in the community in which it is located. There must be something permanent and tangible to substantiate its title to recognition. There you go. According to the state, that's what a church is. And maybe we start questioning, do we want the state to be the one deciding what is and what is not a church? In 1906, there was something created called the Census for Religious Bodies. We wanted the numbers. In Europe, they've got better stats. We wanted those better stats. So in 1906, we start that, but it never got off the ground, partly because of privacy concerns and partly because it ran into the Great Depression. In the 1950s, there was the understanding or the idea that maybe we should be counting ourselves, quantifying ourselves in terms of religion. And so in 1957, there was a census that did ask about religious affiliation. It showed about 2/3 of the American population as identifying as Protestants. Something of a high watermark, 1957, about 66% of the population. But the religious questions were removed from the census in the 1960s over renewed concerns, this time from the Jewish community, that reminded us all that sometimes when the government makes you publicly identify which religion you are, well, that could be problematic. And so in October of 1976, the United States Congress passed a law stating that you cannot require anyone to answer religious questions on a government-sanctioned mandatory census. So when it comes to church participation, church numbers in America, we start behind the 8 ball. But there is something to be said about not letting bureaucrats into the religion business. It's already weird enough that all of our stats, whether it be Gallup or Poll or Pew, tend to note attendance at a particular building. You know, one of those buildings where there must be something permanent and tangible to substantiate its recognition. That's how we count Christians. It's been said in so many ways this weekend, but the church has very little to do with the building. The Greek word, ekklesia, it's the called out. It's a verb acting like a noun. It has nothing to do with foundations and walls, something permanent and tangible to substantiate its title. And this might be part of the very answer to the question of a dying church. First Lutheran Church of Glendale might die, but the church cannot, even when it looks like it. One more important note on stats and the census and church attendance. Last century, in the 1900s, active church membership was counted by Gallup and Pew, counted twice a week, attendance at church as an active participant. You were an active participant if you went to church twice a week. Around the turn of the century, that changed to once a week. You were considered an active participant if you attended church once a week. And since COVID, the number has changed as well. If now you go to a church twice a month, you are considered an active participant. So the stats might even be worse than we thought. But there is nothing new under the sun, and we certainly have parallels throughout history. And as the resident historian, I thought it would make sense to go and look, when else has the church died? When else has the church been in the state that it's in now, at least in America, decreasing? So I recalled a chapter from G.K. Chesterton's The Everlasting Man. If you know this work, The Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton was, in many ways, the work that made C.S. Lewis a Christian. C.S. Lewis thinks it is one of the great apologetic works. And in this book, he has a chapter, sixth chapter, second book, called The 5 Deaths of the Church. So color me intrigued. What are these 5 deaths? What are the 5 times in history where the church has died? He counts the times of Arius, the Albigensians, the rise of the Renaissance humanist. G.K. was a Catholic, not a big fan of the Reformation. And then he counts the Enlightenment and Darwin. He says these are the 5 times. So Arius, the Arian controversy, that of course is the 4th century bishop and the question about who Jesus is, the person of Christ. Albigensians, this is a Gnostic heresy in the south of France in the 1200s. Of course, the Renaissance humanist is certainly not the secular humanist of today, but was still seen by Chesterton as sufficiently independent. And then you have the Enlightenment and Darwin. And I think what Chesterton is talking about, the death of the church when it comes to the Enlightenment and Darwin, was a kind of disenchantment with the world. Everything is becoming a math problem. There's no mystery at all. It's all atoms and science and material. So we have a denial of Jesus as divine, a heresy that wants to reject all physical things, and ideas that elevate the individual over creation and the creator. And Chesterton says these were really, really bad things for the church. Chesterton goes on to write, Christendom has had a series of revolutions, and in each one of them, Christianity has died. Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave. Amen. But this doesn't make the current threat any less of a concern. And in the same way that we needed creeds and confessions and thoughtful Christians back in the day, perhaps we can use that today. So what is this new death? Perhaps we might call it, with apologies to G.K. Chesterton, the 6th death of the church. And you know the numbers. The unaffiliated rate in America is now 1 in 3. Some 33% of Americans, young Americans, are calling themselves nuns. Not agnostic, not atheist, nothing at all. In 1957, when we had that census, the percentage was 2.7% were nuns. And now we're over 30. To quote the now sainted Rod Rosenblatt, there are alumni of the church, those who have left, those who have deconstructed into a nun, a sentence which 10 years ago made no sense. And Rod talked about the mad alumni and the sad alumni, and these are very, very important groups, but there might be one more. The apathetic. Neither sound, nor fury, nor angst, nor sighing, just a shrug. So what do we do with this new breed of person? Well, first, it's not as if a new group of people were created ex nihilo, out of nothing. What we're finding is an impulse in the American population that identifies with a new and now socially acceptable moniker, that of nun. And this is part of the big shift that's happening. If you go back to the Geneva of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1770s, in his utopia, everything was allowed. There was one thing that was not allowed: atheism. It's the only thing you couldn't believe. You had to believe in God. But now that church attendance is on the decline in America, it's no longer a given. It might even be, for some, a liability. And I don't think it's that 1 in 3 people just woke up one morning and decided to become something new. It's that language developed. It's that the so-called Christmas and Easter Christian was finally given permission to just quit the whole thing, to quit the charade. This is part of a great sorting happening now in post-Christian America, a great truth-telling, where we're finally getting real and maybe admitting who we are. And in this, we might see death. We might see death, and we have seen the death of cultural Christianity. And I hope cultural Christianity dies 1,000 deaths. So, to get back to Dan's initial question, how can we say that everything is going to be okay if we have these numbers, if we see this great sorting? Number one, we can say this because, like her Savior, the church will die and rise again. Like the changings of the season, like clockwork, like another fall of disappointing Angels baseball. It just keeps happening. Your vocation someone was clapping. I don't know, was that because you're pro-Angels or anti-Angels and you're glad to see us? Pro, thank you, all right. Okay. So, let's talk about the Twins. You're in the Central. You're in the AL Central. You can win 84 games and make the playoffs. And that's not fair. Okay, sorry. People start yapping back at me through the lights, and I can't see you guys, but I'm going to talk more. Baseball, jeez. Oh, is everything going to be okay? Sure. Yes. Okay. It's like clockwork. The church will die, and it will rise again. That's what happens. And then perhaps also, like Schrodinger's cat, perhaps the church at large is in a state of superposition. Alive, dead, both, until you observe an individual church. Last weekend, a kid was baptized at our church in a kiddie pool outside in a park, because that's what we do in Southern California. The church was alive because it was baptizing. The church is alive, the individual church, when it's preaching, when it's comforting, when it's forgiving, when it's calling out, ecclesia. Can the institution die? Yes. And if it wasn't for health insurance, we'd probably root for it to die faster. And it might die 5 or or 500 more times. A great sorting, apathy, sad alumni, mad alumni. And as it's been in the past, a series of revolutions. As Chesterton says, in each one of them, Christianity has died. Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave.